I knew something was wrong the second I walked into my own house and found Deborah Lewis standing in my living room with a hammer in her hand and a smug look on her face. It was surreal. She was the HOA president, the kind of woman who passed out cookies with fake smiles, and yet here she was caught red-handed damaging my property. Before I could even process it, she whipped out her phone and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher that I was the one who'd attacked her. The audacity nearly knocked the breath out of me. A few minutes later, flashing lights washed across the neighborhood, and I knew I was in the middle of something bigger than a petty neighbor dispute. This nightmare had started months earlier when my wife Laura left on deployment. 6 months gone, limited communication, me stuck handling everything at home alone. That's when Deborah first appeared at my doorstep, a plate of cookies in her hands and sympathy in her voice. She introduced herself as the HOA president and said she liked to give extra support to military families. She offered to help me with paperwork, contractors, anything I might need while Laura was away. At the time, it felt like a blessing. I didn't realize I was being scouted. Deborah began showing up more often, offering guidance on so-called compliance issues. She even did a routine inspection, walking through my backyard with construction-grade equipment, taking photographs, and measuring foundation lines as if she were preparing for a lawsuit instead of checking on a fence. She wore real estate pins on her jacket and drove a luxury car with dealership frames. Something about it felt off, but I chalked it up to her being a little too professional for a neighborhood volunteer. She wasn't alone. A man named Marcus appeared conveniently during one of her inspections. He claimed to be a fellow military neighbor and even mentioned knowing Laura through base security. He was friendly, easy to talk to, and quick to praise Deborah's knowledge. They tag-teamed perfectly. Looking back, it was obvious they were rehearsed. At the time, I just felt grateful that people seemed willing to help me while I was carrying the weight of deployment alone. Then came the letter. An official-looking notice from the HOA citing historic district noncompliance. It listed architectural requirements that would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Period windows, heritage paint colors, structural modifications that made no sense for our home. Deborah delivered it personally, explaining every detail like she was a seasoned attorney. She made it sound like these rules were carved in stone, and without her guidance, I'd be buried in fines. Right on cue, Marcus showed up the next morning and told me he'd gone through the exact same thing, but Deborah had saved him a fortune by guiding him through the process. He showed me paperwork, contractor contacts, the whole performance. It was too polished to be coincidence, but at the time I bought it. The financial hook came next. Deborah offered a community improvement loan through a special HOA fund, low interest, flexible terms, available only to military families. All I had to do was sign off on a preliminary lien against my property. She made it sound like a formality. Marcus backed up every word, talking about how the loan had helped him and how everything turned out great. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and convinced they were trying to help. I signed. She asked for copies of my deed, mortgage, and Laura's deployment orders to verify eligibility. I handed them over, believing it was just paperwork. What I really did was hand over my family's most sensitive information to a predator. Within days, contractors started submitting identical estimates for the supposed renovations. At first, I was impressed with the consistency until I stumbled on near-identical documents in Marcus's mailbox, right down to the handwriting. That's when the mask started to slip. I poked around more and found brochures in Marcus's garage with the same logo that decorated Deborah's car. They weren't HOA materials. They were real estate development plans. Detailed strategies for acquiring property from military families during deployments using manufactured violations and financial pressure. My stomach dropped. This wasn't neighborhood drama. It was a professional scam designed to strip vulnerable families of their homes. When I confronted Marcus, he admitted it. Not with shame, but with a salesman's spin. He claimed it was helping families unlock their property's potential, while describing how they targeted deployment schedules, manufactured crises, and used loans as leverage for foreclosure. Hearing him lay it out so calmly made my skin crawl. All the friendly conversations, the beers we'd shared, the supposed camaraderie, It had all been an act. 3 days before Laura was supposed to return, I discovered a text on Marcus's phone referencing emergency acquisition protocols that needed to be triggered before she came back. That's when I realized things were about to escalate. But Laura came home early. She walked through the door in uniform, sharp-eyed and calm, asking for details about every interaction. I expected anger, but she treated it like a briefing. That's when I learned just how much she knew. Laura wasn't just my wife. She was a regional commander, trained in intelligence and counter-operations. While I'd been stumbling through paranoia, she'd been analyzing patterns from overseas, already suspecting what was happening. We didn't just want to escape, we wanted to end their operation. Laura staged herself as vulnerable, playing the part of the stressed spouse, desperate for more loan assistance. She recorded everything, capturing Deborah's discriminatory terms and admissions about targeting military families. She dissected the loan documents and found illegal clauses designed specifically to exploit deployment income. Every piece of evidence went into a growing file. Then came the night everything boiled over. Marcus fed Deborah the story that Laura was panicking about foreclosure, and they decided to act. They used their access rights from the loan agreement to enter our house, carrying tools and fake inspection papers. Their plan was to sabotage the property, foam in the foundation to simulate cracks, loosened wires to suggest fire hazards, mold samples planted in the basement. It was methodical, calculated, and horrifying to watch. Following Laura's instructions, I came home early and caught them in the act. Papers were spread across my dining table, outlining emergency condemnation procedures. This wasn't improvisation. They had done this many times before. I started recording, capturing Deborah as she boasted about how emergency municipal powers allowed them to seize properties legally once inspectors deemed them unsafe. When she realized I was onto her, she dialed 911 again, spinning a story about me attacking them during a legitimate safety inspection. Marcus even staged fake injuries. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Stone stepped out, young and earnest, clearly expecting a messy domestic dispute. Deborah was already in tears, describing me as violent and dangerous, insisting our home was a threat to the neighborhood. Marcus nodded along, holding his fake wounds. To an outsider, their story looked airtight. The structural damage they planted looked real. The documents seemed official. My protests about organized fraud sounded like desperate excuses. And then Laura stepped into the doorway. She had changed into her full dress uniform, complete with the insignia of her command. The shift in atmosphere was instant. Officer Stone froze, recognizing her rank. The fake narrative collapsed the moment he realized who Deborah and Marcus had been targeting. He straightened, switched to protocol, and radioed for military police support. Deborah's face in that moment was unforgettable. She had spent months constructing a perfect trap, only to realize she had been targeting the highest-ranking military officer in 3 states. The horror on her face was better than any revenge I could have imagined. Laura calmly announced charges: breaking and entering, property destruction, filing false reports, and systematic discrimination against military families. Stone obeyed without hesitation. Within weeks, federal investigators dismantled the entire network. Marcus turned informant to save himself, handing over files on a dozen other families they had targeted. Deborah's development company assets were seized, restitution paid out, and the HOA was dissolved under federal oversight. Our neighbors, who once thought Deborah was the model of community service, were stunned to learn she had been running a predatory scheme right under their noses. 6 months later, the neighborhood felt different. Barbecues were about actual friendship, not intelligence gathering. Families spoke openly again, no longer fearing manufactured violations. Laura and I processed the betrayal together, understanding that it wasn't personal weakness that had trapped us. It was a systematic criminal enterprise designed to exploit military service. The only difference was that this time, they had picked the wrong family. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts alone. Sometimes it comes when a criminal finally realizes exactly who they've been targeting. And I'll never forget the look on Deborah's face when she discovered the vulnerable spouse she'd been circling was, in fact, the regional commander with the power to bring her entire empire crashing down.